let's just go ahead and roll the video, and we'll see if we can respond in kind to any of your, apparently it's going to be brilliant arguments, right? It's got to be, because this video's got a ton of hits in the last year, almost 2,000 likes, just shy of 400 dislikes. So, you know, this guy must be busting out some really good scientific evidence. So let's see what he's got.
How is this so hard to understand?
Okay, so we're definitely off to a bad start here. Martymer, this is not hard to understand. We all get it. This is supposed to be the spinning sphere Earth, you know, tilted at a 66.6 degree tilt off of its horizontal, 23.4 off of the vertical axis, spinning at, well, half the speed as the hour hand on a clock at the pole, allegedly, and spinning 1,037.5 miles an hour at the equator, allegedly. Somehow, the people on the bottom and the people on the top all experience this sphere as if they were on the top. And this all has to do with this theory of gravity. But just to back up the wagon here again, the only reason that we need this theory of gravity is if the Earth is a sphere and it's spinning. Okay? So we get it though. I mean, I understand. I'm 35 years old. You know that. You were born in 81, I suppose. So we're 35. I was born in February. Pisces. Good to meet you. For 34 years of my life, I fully understood this, and I was a big fan of NASA. You know, I considered myself a scientific person, or at least a person that was very interested in science, always really enjoyed science class and that sort of thing, and physics, and, you know, all the way through school. I did real well in the sciences and etc. So, at any rate, we get it. It's not hard to understand. The problem is the Earth isn't actually a spinning sphere. That's the problem. Now, what you don't seem to understand is that we do get it. The thing is, though, is you're approaching this from a position of total ignorance, sort of like a deer with caught in headlights, because you're not looking at this scientifically. If you really wanted to look at this scientifically, you would actually compare your evidence or compare observations in both models and see, you know, see which one works. That's sort of how science goes. I mean, you know, I'm not going to get technical with the steps involved with the scientific method or the zetetic process, but really both are about one and the same, really. However, science tends to fill in gaps of unknowns with hypotheses or assumptions or even conjecture, and that's fine to an extent. I mean, I have no problem with humoring an assumption to test a theory. My problem is at some point we really have to prove the assumptions, and we've done it. That's what you're failing to realize, but we get this. So I just wanted to stop you right there, because this is one of the most typical arguments of globe earthers, is that we flat earthers, we're so stupid because we don't get the globe. No, we get it. You don't get it. That's the problem.
I mean, seriously, how can this be so... How stupid do you have to be to not understand?
Okay, so you're not going to finish a sentence. You're just going to keep saying things like, how stupid can you be to not understand this? Again, I've already gone through pretty thoroughly that we do understand it. That's, you know, you've got your hand in your face, and trust me, I'm right there with you, buddy. Yeah, really. And it's a good thing I paused it here. That was just luck of the draw. This is an azimuthal equidistant projection. It's with the North Pole being in the center. And that's a pretty wildly exaggerated ice cap in the North Pole. It's nothing like that according to NASA these days. But this is an AE projection. So what that means is near the center, it's fairly well accurate in terms of relative sizes and distances. That would actually be fairly well accurate. However, once you get out towards the equator, which is, let's see, right about here, I believe. Yeah, right here. when you get to the equator, and especially beyond the equator, the relative sizes and distances between continents becomes more and more skewed. So you would say, well, that's a pretty stupid map, right? But that's pretty much the same problems with the Mercator projection, which is what you believe in terms of the globe being splayed out and projected onto a sort of a square or rectangular shaped map. This is, by the way, what navigators use. So the Mercator projection does actually work, but what the similarity between the Mercator projection and the azimuthal equidistant is that the Mercator projection is a cylindrical conformal map. And what that means is that while the Mercator projection is basically correct towards the equator in terms of relative sizes and distances between continents, however, the further north or south you get of the equator, the more and more skewed those relative sizes and distances between continents become, up to the point of infinity at the 90-degree north and south latitudes. So that means essentially that a single point is allegedly stretched across the entire stretch of the top and bottom of the map. Now, one thing I will mention real quick is that the Mercator projection shows pretty clearly that circumnavigation is only possible as an east to west sort of deal, because, well, you know, it's what happens if you go up from the top of the Mercator projection? Well, you obviously don't come back up at the bottom, but if you go left from the west, if you go west from the left side of the Mercator projection, you will indeed pop out at the right. And so this sort of gives you an idea of the issues with the Mercator projection. It is actually admitted to be not an accurate representation of the face of the Earth. However, it does work for navigational purposes because it's just following the assumed, the known or assumed lines of longitude and latitude, which are just based on solar and astronomical observations. So it is, you can count on either map as long as you understand how to navigate and how to plot your course just based on observation and reckoning and knowing how to do it. Okay, so just figured I'd point that out about the Mercator projection versus the azimuthal equidistant projection because there are issues with both in terms of being an accurate representation of the face of the Earth. So, I mean, obviously you haven't gone this far into the research because, again, you're approaching this topic from a position of ignorance. You're assuming that this whole hypothesis, or actually the truth, you're assuming that the truth is stupid and impossible because you have this firm belief system that you live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere. Because that's what we were taught all our lives, and you know, we fully understand it. I mean, how could anyone really go through 34 years of life, you know, go through gifted classes, AP and advanced classes through high school, go to college, and fully understand or not understand that we live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere? I mean, like, really, do you think that we crawled out from some sort of a cave and just appeared here on Earth, or no? No, we understand. So,
Flat earthers are probably the most deluded science deniers I've ever come across.
oh boy. Well, I would say in retort to that, the same could be said about globers. Science is supposed to be an unbiased process to discern the truth. Science should be there to test all hypotheses fairly, use observations, experiments, demonstrations, repeatable, falsifiable observations, demonstrations, and experiments, and that's what science is. And all of the repeatable, falsifiable, demonstratable experiments and observations all point to the Earth having no curvature, sphericity, or axial rotation, let alone orbital velocities or the solar velocities or the galactic frame of reference. I mean, if the Earth isn't spinning and it's not a sphere, I don't think we need to continue proving, you know, that the solar frame of reference, for example, the sun zipping around the Milky Way quote-unquote galaxy at 485,000 miles an hour over its 250 million year cycle. And you would call these proven facts, when in fact they are just theories. There haven't been scientists around for 250 million years to witness this cycle of the sun going around the alleged Milky Way galaxy. And by the way, did you know that the galaxy was invented in 1929 by a dude named Hubble? Yeah, they named a telescope after him. So up until 1929, nobody, everybody up at Newton, all these guys believed that essentially our galaxy was the center of the universe. And again, it wasn't until 1929 that Hubble postulated and sort of went around on a rampage, just shoving it down people's throats, that these, little spirals far off in the night sky are, somehow akin to this quote-unquote galaxy that we live in. I think I should go ahead and extend this out a little bit because you obviously don't understand. The entire model that you have in terms of the heliocentric model, you can't apply those sizes and distances to the flat Earth model. They're two totally different things. It's like you're bringing a cake to a gunfight. It's incompatible. So just to mention that quickly, you believe the sun is 93 million miles away, I'm sure, due to Eratosthenes, if I've got that right. But you believe that because Eratosthenes assumed that the Earth was a sphere and used spherical trigonometry to estimate the distance to the sun based on the angles of the shadows cast by the sun at high noon on 2 points on the same meridian line. And this can be repeated. However, if you assume the Earth to be a plane, then that actually puts the sun much, much closer, slightly less than 4,000 miles. So you can laugh at that, but actually this means you can't sort of apply all of your preconceived programming, pre-programming. I was going to say preconceived notions, but they aren't even notions of your own. This is stuff that you were spoon-fed since you were a child, and you firmly believe it. But you really can't use your programming as proof of anything. So we'll continue.
While creationists deny specific things about the scientific method, specifically that one can confirm a hypothesis regarding the past by observing the present, flat...
Okay, wait a minute. Let's just listen to that again. Hang on.
Specifically that one can confirm a hypothesis regarding the past by observing the present, flat earthers go so far as to reject easily observable facts as well, something not even New Agers will do.
Whoa. So wait a minute. So you're saying that we're rejecting facts, we're anti-science? Okay. So you're now be honest. It is a fact that there is no curvature of the Earth. It is a fact that the Earth isn't spinning. And so for you to say that we flat earthers are rejecting the facts is very hypocritical. However, it is extremely typical because you have a very strong belief that you live on a spinning sphere when in fact the Earth is a stationary plane.
Yeah. Okay. Look, anyway, obviously there's no way to convince someone who is so deluded that they will deny things that they can clearly see and test.
I'm sorry, I did have to chuckle out loud. Because you, my friend, are guilty. Guilty.
Repeatedly. So that's not my goal here. Instead, I simply want to talk about what these people believe and...
Okay, so you're going to talk about what these people believe based on your total lack of understanding and research into the topic based on what you believe. So not only are you basing this on what you actually believe, but then you're also basing on it what you believe I believe, and you don't even have a fucking clue what I understand. It isn't even a belief, it's an awareness. I mean, it's been proven. There isn't even a debate anymore as far as I'm concerned. However, we really do have to stick with the basics because unfortunately there are a lot of people out there who are fairly intelligent but have unfortunately been programmed into this really preposterous lie. Now, I'm not dissing you because I was right there with you just about a year ago. Almost to this very week was when I actually really started researching this topic. So I've been into this for a year, and I've found no sort of evidence to support curvature, axial rotation, and in fact, all of the evidence really clearly points to the Earth being stationary and without any sort of curvature. And I don't know if you know this, but the shape of the sphere would necessitate curvature.
Most importantly, how we know that they're wrong.
How we know that they're wrong. Okay, I really want to hear this because, man, if you could just help me understand how I've been wrong. Well, first of all, I was wrong for 34 years. Now that I finally realize that that was all wrong, I think we're closer to the truth. Now, I don't think that you can call an active scientific experiment or an active scientific movement wrong. Again, science is the hunt for truth.
When you ask most people how they know that the Earth is round, they'll probably refer to pictures of the Earth as seen from space. Of course, flat earthers.
Okay, wait a minute. So, pictures of the Earth from space. This right here looks like high altitude flight with a fisheye lens. I don't know what your altitude is here, but I will cut in some video showing that regardless of altitude, you don't find any of this curvature like NASA proclaims. You don't see any sort of dropping away of the horizon as altitude is gained, even 20 and 30 miles into the air. And so this picture here is it's a fake, it's a phony. Do you really think that this cloud right here covers that much of the face of the Earth? No, this is just a small portion of the horizon, and you can actually take this into, and I'll do it, take it into Photoshop and unwarp that and see what the horizon actually looks like. You know, I might not actually do it because it's irrelevant. You can see plenty of real pictures of high altitude weather balloon footage that clearly shows that such curvature doesn't exist.
Claim that these are all fake, but even if they were all fake, every single one, that still wouldn't matter. Contrary to what flat earthers.
Okay, so you're saying that if NASA is faking all these pictures, that wouldn't matter? So you're saying that if NASA is indeed lying to everyone and stealing our money, it's going to be about 20 billion for this year, next year? Yeah, something like that. It's 18 or 20 billion. I think it's 20 billion for 17, along with some unknown horde of private investments, which according to Chucky Holden, they project that to be more than, I think he said 15 times or 25 times more than the last 15 years combined, or something to that effect. So they are certainly getting a lot of money to produce these films, but you're under the impression that if they're lying, that's not a big deal? Okay.
Claim we've known that the Earth was round for a lot longer than we've been able to go high enough to actually take pictures that show the curvature of the Earth.
Okay, so you're saying that we've known the Earth was round before we could actually go high enough to take pictures. So you're saying that in order to confirm the belief that the Earth is round, that we would have to go high enough to take pictures. Or maybe that you're saying the opposite of that. I don't know. That's not the point. But for people to hypothesize that the Earth is round and, you know, build models around that hypothesis doesn't mean that they knew it. You know, those same people believe that, we're talking about ancient Greeks here, that the elements, you know, all stuffs or matter was made of earth, fire, wind, and water, or something like that. And, you know, modern science would tell you today, you know, they'll show you the periodic table of the elements. So that's a little bit more complex than earth, fire, wind, and water. But so you're saying that they knew this, even though they couldn't go up high enough to prove it. Okay. I just have to disagree with you here. Even Ptolemy in the 1st century AD had a geostationary model, geocentric geostationary model. And many ancient astronomers used geostationary, geocentric models that worked. So you could say that people knew the Earth was indeed flat and stationary long before people thought the Earth was a globe. So this argument sort of goes both ways, and it's almost like, you know, I thought we were going to be talking about science here. Like, where's the curvature, where's the axial rotation. You're just basically building up this chest-beating case that, you know, how stupid are the flat earthers? We've known this for 500 years, as if we weren't aware.
Directly. The first observation that led the more well-educated people of the ancient world to understand that the Earth was at least curved, if not necessarily spherical, was probably that as you move to higher ground, things that were previously below the horizon become visible. The fact that this is the case in every direction indicates that the surface of the Earth curves down away from you in all directions. This is...
Okay, so I've just got to back this up a hair, and then I'll address your little chart here. Oh, goodness. Now, first of all, you'll notice that this rocket, this simulation that you've got here, this rocket has gone, what? I can't read it here, but we're certainly not even out of the troposphere, obviously. And you can see that based on the spherical Earth model, if this is an accurate to scale model, which I'm assuming it is, or why would you be using it, this curvature here, you don't find it. And I'll cut in some much higher altitude weather balloon footage than this. You don't have to be on a rocket to observe higher elevations, right? But you'll notice they actually did get something right, that there is sort of a vanishing point, but that actually remains perfectly horizontal regardless of altitude. So your little model here is totally wrong. I mean, what is it, like a, I don't know, a grapefruit-sized Earth with an ant-sized rocket here? Or is this a to-scale model? Anyways, they did get it right in terms of this sort of, you've got sort of a sphere or a hemisphere around you, which is your visible line of sight, especially when closer to the ground because of atmospheric refraction. Now, this effect gets lesser and lesser as you gain in altitude, which is observable by, like I said, weather balloon footage. And NASA, they create very expensive Lie-mobiles. I'm sure you're familiar with them. But, yeah, wow. I mean, this is just wow. Now,
the Earth curves down away from you in all directions.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
This is an observation.
No, it doesn't. Okay, so you've got this little diagram here showing, and I'll let you finish your sentence.
I'm confident that every flat earther has made, but of course they'll deny it, since it proves that at least the Earth is not a flat disc, as they say.
Okay, so I guess what you're saying here is that when we gain in altitude, and I love how you didn't put the man on the top of the sphere, very, very clever of you, because you do realize that you should always, if you're going to put a globe Earth, the observer, if you're going to do something like this, should always be on the top of the sphere. Because according to you, you're never going to be standing back at an angle like this, are you? No, you're going to be at the top of the sphere. So that's a little bit disingenuous of you. But actually, I'll show you how this same thing works on a plane. I mean, really, you think that this sort of observation is exclusive to a sphere? And I'm actually going to redo your drawing here properly to show that, first of all, you're being disingenuous trying to cram this into your model, but this is actually not what we see. As you can see here, at a low altitude, the observer, and actually that would be about the height of the ISS actually in relation to the actual spherical Earth, if it was indeed true. That right around in between these two is about how high up they claim the ISS is relative to the Earth. Okay, about 249 miles, I think. Yeah, you've got a direct line of sight towards the edge of the sphere like that. How does that work? That is just extremely disingenuous of you, and I'm going to have to redo your diagram here because, wow, that's not right, dude.
This is an observation I'm confident that every flat earther has made, but of course they'll deny it.
I love that picture, and I could tattoo right here, Martymer.
Since it proves that at least the Earth is not a flat disc, as they say. Another observation easily made by ancient civilizations.
Yeah, that proves that the Earth is not a flat disc, because when you rise in altitude, your field of view increases. I mean, seriously? Really?
Is the circular shadow the Earth casts on the moon.
The circular shadow that you assume the Earth casts on the moon during an eclipse. You obviously haven't researched this much because there's a lot of observations of lunar eclipses where the sun and moon were visible in the sky together. So I'm really not sure, and I'm sure that there's some long scientifical explanation that you believe is mathematically viable. So it, blah blah blah, whatever. But the fact is, there's been, and I can cite you examples, but I would beg you to do your own research. But there are actually examples, many examples of the sun and the moon being visible in the same sky during a lunar eclipse.
During a lunar eclipse. These only occur during full moon, when incidentally the sun and the moon are directly opposite to each other in the sky.
Yeah, okay. So what you're showing here is well, that's not a lunar eclipse. I mean, I guess this would be a solar eclipse. You've got your little umbra and penumbra deal going on here. In order to make the totally laughable observations of eclipses work in your model, you have to actually believe that the light from the sun is actually inverting itself here, and then yet again, like for a lunar eclipse, it's inverting itself yet again, and then that's where we get the blood moons. But I'll say it again, there's been observations, say the observers here, for a lunar eclipse when the sun and the moon were visible in the sky together. So how is that possible for the sun and the moon to be visible in the same sky and have this alignment?
The Earth gets in the way and casts a roughly circular shadow on the moon, not a highly...
Wow. Well, that is way off scale.
eccentric one, as it would if the Earth were a circle.
Okay, so this is where you are just totally ruined. This proves that you haven't studied this topic, and you're just simply acting upon your programming, coming from a total position of ignorance and claiming that your position is scientific because you are regurgitating what you've been told and what you believe. This is sort of, well, this is exactly like a religion, and it's actually heliocentrism, is sun worship, but we'll get into that way later.
Circular disk. Nor is the shape of the shadow consistent with the Earth having...
Yeah, this is not, you're trying to apply globe Earth logic to the flat Earth model. This is ridiculous. We're not saying that the Earth is a disk orbiting the sun. What are you even talking about? I'm gonna have to bring up some examples of eclipses in the flat Earth model, because you're just totally, this isn't even an argument, this is a non-argument. This is your belief system of what we believe being completely erroneous. So, I mean, you don't even have any credibility whatsoever. You're trying to apply your beliefs to the truth, which is the total opposite. Again, the truth is the Earth is a stationary plane, and the sun and moon are mere, very mysterious objects that are secondary to the vastly superior stationary plane Earth. This is just hogwash, man, hogwash.
Any other shape than a spheroid. When the book of Isaiah was written, around 600 BCE, the average person in the Middle East probably still believed that the Earth was a flat circular disk, as...
Okay, so, so you're going to start bringing up biblical references into a scientific debate. I mean, that's fine. Obviously, you're a Christian person, I would guess, since you're starting to quote, Bible verses. A circle isn't a sphere, but I'm sure you're going to say that a circle is a sphere.
Clearly described in that book, which is obviously...
Oh, and by the way, this word tent here, these are all mistranslations. The word tent was a word used... I forget the word, but I did research the etymology, and that word that was used in the original language was actually to crush like a fine powder, or even like a fine veil. So it didn't necessarily say tent. That's just the translation from the original language, which would be, Aramaic or Hebrew to Greek to Latin to Old English to English, and, the old game of telephone, you get a bunch of bad translations. So this, like tent, would be one of them. Another one would actually be firmament. The word for firmament was rock, R-A-Q, and that simply meant expanse. So again, I think that quoting the King James Bible for proofs or disproofs of a spherical earth or a flat earth is sort of the wrong approach. Now, personally, you know, there are a lot of spiritual affirmations to be had when you realize that the Bible is actually correct in terms of calling the earth fixed and immovable. And I've never seen any spinning sphere flying through space, you know, millions of miles an hour, ultimately, as fixed and immovable. So, you know, for you to try to use the Bible to favor the earth argument is really kind of silly, but I guess your ultimate punchline is just going to be to denounce Christianity and how stupid Christians are, right?
Why it was written the way it was. However, modern fundamentalist Christians will be quick to point out that circle actually means sphere, or
circle actually means sphere. Really? So you're saying this, or you're saying that fundamentalist Christians are saying this? Because if you're saying that circle actually means sphere, you're absolutely wrong. If I draw a circle on my wall, is that a sphere? Even if I shade it correctly, is it a sphere or is it still just a circle? Is a pizza a sphere? Is a balloon a circle when it's inflated? I mean, well, kind of, if you're looking at it that way, but technically it's sort of a spheroid. Your arguments are ridiculous.
Well, it's just a way to describe the earth that the people of the time would understand. And it's very likely that the educated people in 600 BCE felt the same way. A few hundred years later, however, the ancient Greeks were definitely well aware of the shape of the earth, and not...
They well assumed the shape of the earth. They assumed it. You know, we can see what appear to be spheres in the night sky, like the sun and the moon and the wandering stars, or the planets, as you would call them. But, you know, that's where this whole thing comes from. We can see what appear to be spheres in the night sky. Therefore, we must also live on a sphere flying around the night sky, right? I mean, there's the logic, but if you see a flock of birds flying past your window, does that mean you're a bird flying past your window? No. Okay, so just sort of point that out there, but you claiming that ancient Greeks knew this is not a proof. They actually, it was a hypothesis that was kicked around a lot. I mean, they debated this, they looked at different models, which is perfectly legitimate, you know, but to say that they knew this is ridiculous. They hypothesized this and built models to fit it, but there were also contemporaneous and even later astronomers that used geocentric flat earth models. And in as early as 700 BC, the ancient Vedics, the Indian traditions, used geostationary, geocentric flat earth models. So, you know, to say that ancient people knew this or ancient people knew that is it's not a scientific point at all. It's just, again, you more trying to just sort of browbeat us with globe earth, you know, logic that we're all very familiar with. But again, we've gotten way past this in reality. So again, this video is a bit dated, but your arguments are typical, and so it's important to you know, get this out there, because you are way off, buddy, and I'm sorry to say, but you're way off.
Just the exceptionally well-educated among them. If nothing else, they were all familiar with ships appearing to sink or rise as they passed the horizon, an observation the goat herders of the Fertile Crescent probably hadn't made.
Okay, so this clearly proves your ignorance on the topic yet again, Martymer, and I'm not sure, like, really, whew, boy, if you observe a ship, you know, sail away from you, it goes out several miles, say you're standing 6 foot above the water line, and the ship sails off 5 miles and begins to sink beneath the quote-unquote curve. And then if you continue to watch it go straight out, it'll vanish. However, if you take out some binoculars, that entire ship will be restored. And then if you track that ship with the binoculars as it continues to gain distance away from you, on a clear day, Once that thing goes around the curve again, bust out a high-powered telescope, and you'll see that ship restored again. So this proves it's not going over a curve, and I'm sure you're going to argue atmospheric refraction, but the numbers don't work. Telescopes can't see around a corner. This is actually just the operations of perspective, and essentially anything near the ground eventually merging with the horizon because of the brilliance of the light. Has a lot to do with it. But it's really just the laws of perspective, and I'm really surprised that you, as such a scientific person, haven't looked into this. Maybe I'll splice in a little excerpt from Zetetic Astronomy from 1865, a book I know you hate. But you're just wrong. And by the way, if there was a secondary observer watching that same ship go over the horizon according to the observer that I just described, if he were, say, on a mountain facing perpendicular to the direction of the observer and watched that same ship, it would just appear to go from left to right on a plane and didn't go over any sort of curve whatsoever. So, this is a clear triangulation proof that there is no curvature. It's just the operations of perspective tricking your eye, and a lot of pre-programming to make you believe the preposterous lies involving this, stationary plane being a spinning sphere.
An observation that flat earthers, incidentally, reject. They either say it doesn't happen, or they say it's just an optical illusion, but they pass the horizon. An observation the goat herders of the Fertile Crescent probably hadn't made. An observation that flat earthers, incidentally, reject. They either...
No, we don't reject it. It's been disproven. We reject your stupidity. We reject this hypothesis anymore because it's been debunked. I just can't believe the level of ignorance that is still festering. And again, this video I'm sort of replying to is a bit dated, but we get the exact same arguments ad nauseum. So I figured I would respond to, obviously, the worst scientific, arguer I've ever seen.
Say it doesn't happen, or they say it's just an optical illusion, but they provide no explanation for how this illusion works.
Oh my god, no explanation of how this illusion works. Yeah, we're gonna have to go back to basics with you, buddy. So I'll cut in a clip here of Zetetic Astronomy from 1865. Section 13, Perspective on the Sea. It has been shown in Section 1, pages 25 to 34, that the law of perspective, as commonly taught in our schools of art, is fallacious and contrary to everything seen in nature. If an object be held up in the air and gradually carried away from an observer who maintains his position, it is true that all its parts will converge to one and the same point. But if the same object be placed upon the ground and similarly moved away from a fixed observer, the same predicate is false. In the first case, the center of an object is the datum to which every point of the exterior converges. But in the second case, the ground becomes the datum, in and towards which every part of the object converges in succession, beginning with the lowest or that nearest to it. Instances: a man with light trousers and black boots walking along a level path will appear at a certain distance as though the boots had been removed and the trousers brought in contact with the ground. A young girl with short garments terminating 10 or 12 inches above the feet will, in walking forward, appear to sink towards the earth, the space between which and the bottom of the clothes will appear to gradually diminish. And in the distance of half a mile, the limbs, which were first seen for 10 or 12 inches, will be invisible. The bottom of the garment will seem to touch the ground. A small dog running along will appear to gradually shorten by the legs, which in less than half a mile will be invisible, and the body appear to glide upon the earth. Horses and cattle moving away from a given point will seem to have lost their hooves and to be walking upon the outer bones of the limbs. Carriages similarly receding will seem to lose that portion of the rim of the wheels which touches the earth. The axles will seem to get lower, and at the distance of a few miles, the body will appear to drag along in contact with the ground. This is very remarkable in the case of a railway carriage when moving away upon a straight and level portion of line several miles in length. These instances, which are but a few of what might be quoted, will be sufficient to prove beyond the power of doubt or the necessity of controversy that upon a plane or a horizontal surface, the lowest part of bodies receding from a given point of observation will disappear before the higher. This is precisely what is observed in the case of a ship at sea, when outward bound, the lowest part, the hull, disappearing before the higher parts, the sails and masthead. Abstractedly, when the lowest part of a receding object thus appears by entering the vanishing point, it could be seen again to any and every extent by a telescope, if the power were sufficient to magnify at the distance observed. This is to a great extent practicable upon smooth horizontal surface as upon frozen lakes or canals, and upon long straight lines of railway. But the power of restoring such objects is greatly modified and diminished, where the surface is undulating or otherwise movable, as in large and level meadows, and pasture lands generally, in the vast prairies and grassy plains of America, and especially so upon the ocean, where the surface is always more or less an undulating condition. In Holland and other level countries, persons have seen in winter skating upon the ice at distances varying from 10 to 20 miles. On some of the straight and, quote, level lines, end quote, of railway which cross the prairies of America, the trains have been observed for more than 20 miles. But upon the sea, the conditions are altered, and the hull of a receding vessel can only be seen for a few miles, and this will depend very greatly, the altitude of the observer being the same, upon the state of the water. When the surface is calm, the hull may be seen much farther than when it is rough and stormy. But under ordinary circumstances, when to the naked eye the hull has just become invisible, or is doubtfully visible, it may be seen again distinctly by the aid of a powerful telescope. Although abstractedly or mathematically there should be no limit to this power of restoring by a telescope a lost object upon a smooth horizontal surface, upon the sea this limit is soon observed. The water being variable in its degree of agitation, the limit of sight over its surface is equally variable, as shown by the following experiments. In May 1864, on several occasions when the water was unusually calm, from the landing stairs of Victoria Pier at Portsmouth, and from an elevation of 2 feet 8 inches above the water, the greater part of the whole of the Nab lightship was, through a good telescope, distinctly visible. But on other experiments being made, when the water was less calm, no portion of it could be seen from the same elevation, notwithstanding that the most powerful telescopes were employed. At other times, half the hull and sometimes only the upper part of the bulwarks were visible. If the hull had been invisible from the rotundity of the earth, the following calculation will show that it should at all times have been 24 feet below the horizon. The distance of the lightship from the pier is 8 statute miles. The elevation of the observer being 32 inches above the water would require 2 miles to be deducted as the distance of the supposed convex horizon. For the square of 2 multiplied by 8 inches, the fall in the first mile of the Earth's curvation equals 32 inches. This is deducted from the 8 miles, will leave 6 miles as the distance from the horizon to the ship. Hence, 6 squared times 8 inches equals 288 inches or 24 feet. The top of the bulwarks, it was said, rose about 10 feet above the waterline, hence deducting 10 from 24 feet, under all circumstances, even had the water been perfectly smooth and stationary, the top of the hole should have been 14 feet below the summit of the arc of water, or beneath the line of sight. This one fact is entirely fatal to the doctrine of the Earth's rotundity, but such facts have been observed in various other places. The Northwest Lightship in Liverpool Bay, and the light vessels of many other channels near the southern, eastern, and western shores of Great Britain. From the beach of Southsea Common near Portsmouth, the observer lying down near the water above the surface of which the eye was 2.5 feet, and with a telescope looking across Spithead to the quarantine ship lying in the Roads, between Ryde and Cowes, in the Isle of Wight, a distance of 7 miles. The copper sheathing of that vessel was distinctly seen, the depth of which was about 2 feet. Making the usual calculation in accordance with the doctrine of the Earth's convexity, it will be seen that an arc of water ought to have existed between the 2 points, the summit of which arc should have been 16 feet above the copper sheathing of the vessel. From an elevation of 2.5 feet above the water, opposite the Royal Yacht Clubhouse in West Cowes, Isle of Wight, the pilework and promenade of the pier at Stokes Bay near Gosport, and nearly opposite Osborne House were easily distinguished through various telescopes. At the distance is 7 miles, the altitude of the promenade 10 feet, and the usual calculation will show that this pier ought to have been many feet below the horizon. It is a well-known fact that the light of the Eddystone Lighthouse is often plainly visible from the beach in Plymouth Sound, and sometimes when the sea is very calm, persons can see it distinctly when sitting in ordinary rowing boats, in that part of the sound which will allow the line of sight to pass between Drake's Island and the western end of the breakwater. The distance is 14 statute miles. In a list of lighthouses in a work called The Lighthouses of the World by A.G. Findlay, FRGS, published in 1862 by Richard H. Lowry, 53 Flat Street, London, it said at page 28, quote, "In the tables, the height of the flame above the highest tide high water level is given, so that it is the minimum range of the light. To this elevation 10 feet is added for the height of the deck of the ship above the sea. Besides the increased distance to which low water will cause the light to be seen, the effect of refraction will also sometimes increase their range. In the tables above referred to, at page 36, the Eddystone light is said to be visible 13 miles. But these 13 miles are nautical measure, and as 3 nautical miles equal 3.5 statute miles, the distance at which the Eddystone light is visible is over 15 statute miles, notwithstanding that the Eddystone light is actually visible at a distance of 15 statute miles, and admitted to be so both by the Admiralty authorities and by calculation according to the doctrine of rotundity. Very often at the same distance, the lantern is not visible at an elevation of 4 feet from the water, showing that the law of perspective previously referred to is greatly influenced by the state of the surface water over which the line of sight is directed. A remarkable illustration of this influence was given in the Western Daily Mercury, published in Plymouth of October 25, 1864. Several discussions had previously taken place at the Plymouth Athenaeum and the Davenport Mechanics Institute on the true figure of the Earth, subsequent to which a committee was formed for the purpose of making experiments bearing on the question at issue. The names of the gentlemen as given in the above-named journal were, quote, Parallax, the author of this work, Theta, Mr. Henry, a teacher in Her Majesty's Dockyard, Devonport, and Monsignor Osborne Richards, Ricard, Mogg, Evers, and Pierce, all of Plymouth. From the report published as above stated, the following quotation is made. Observation 6th, quote, on the beach at 5 feet from the water, the Eddystone was entirely out of sight, end quote. The matter may be summarized as follows. At any time, when the sea is calm and the weather clear, the light of the Eddystone, which is 89 feet above the foundation on the rock, may be distinctly seen from an elevation of 5 feet above the water level. According to the Admiralty directions, it, quote, may be seen 13 nautical or 15 statute miles, end quote, or 1 mile still further away than the position of the observers on the above-named occasion. And yet, on that occasion, and at a distance of only 14 statute miles, quotes coming from Lighthouses of the World, page 36, and at a distance of only 14 statute miles, notwithstanding that it was a very fine autumn day, and a clear background existed, not only was the lantern, which is 89 feet high, not visible, but the top of the vane, which is 100 feet above the foundation, was, as stated in the report, entirely out of sight. That vessels and lighthouses are sometimes more distinctly seen than at others, and that the lower parts of such objects are sooner lost sight of when the sea is rough than when it is calm, are items in the experience of seafaring people as common as their knowledge of the changes in the weather, and prominence is only given here to the above case because it was verified by persons of different opinions upon the subject of the earth's form, and in the presence of several hundreds of the most learned and respectable inhabitants of the Plymouth and the neighborhood. The conclusion which such observations necessitate and force upon us is that the law of perspective, which is everywhere visible on land, is modified when observed in connection with objects upon or near the sea. But how modified? If the water of the ocean were frozen and at perfect rest, any object upon its surface would be seen as far as a telescope or magnifying power could be brought to bear upon it. But because this is not the case, because the water is always more or less in motion, not only of progression but of fluctuation, the swells and waves into which the surface is broken operate to prevent the line of sight from passing parallel to the horizontal surface of the water. It has been shown at pages 16 to 20, also 25 to 33, section 1, that the surface of the earth and sea appears to rise up to the level or altitude of the eye, and that at a certain distance the line of sight and the surface which is parallel to it appear to converge to a vanishing point which is the horizon. If this horizon or vanishing point were formed by the apparent junction of two perfectly stationary parallel lines, it could be penetrated by a telescope of sufficient power to magnify at the distance, but because upon the sea the surface of the water is not stationary, the line of sight at the vanishing point becomes angular instead of parallel, and telescopic power is of little avail in restoring objects beyond this point. The following diagram will render this clear. Section 13, figure 1. So the following diagram will render this clear. The horizontal line CDE and the line of sight AB are parallel to each other and appear to meet at the vanishing point B. But at and about this point, the line AB is intercepted by the undulating or fluctuating surface of the water, the degree of which is variable, being sometimes very great and other times inconsiderable, and having to pass over the crest of the waves, as at H, is obliged to become AH instead of AB, and will therefore fall upon a ship, lighthouse, or other object at the point S, or higher or lower as such objects are more or less beyond the point H. It is worthy of note that the waves at the point H, whatever their real magnitude may be, are magnified and rendered more obstructive by the very instrument, the telescope, which is employed to make the objects beyond more plainly visible, and thus the phenomenon is often very strikingly observed, that while a powerful telescope will render the sails and rigging of a ship when beyond the point H, or the optical horizon, so distinct that the very ropes are easily distinguished, not the slightest portion of the hull can be seen. The, quote, crested waters, end quote, form a barrier to the horizontal line of sight as substantial as would the summit of an intervening rock or island. In the report which appeared in the Western Daily Mercury of October 25, 1864, the following observations were also recorded. Quote, on the seafront of the Camera House, and at an elevation of 110 feet from the mean level of the sea, a plane mirror was fixed by the aid of a plumb line in a true vertical position. In this mirror, the distant horizon was distinctly visible on a level with the eye of the observer. This was the simple fact as observed by the several members of the committee which had been appointed. But some of the observers remarked that the line of the horizon in the mirror rose and fell with the eye, as also did everything else which was reflected, and that this ought to be recorded as an addendum. Granted, the surface of the sea appeared to regularly ascend from the base of the hoe to the distant horizon. The horizon from the extreme east to the west, as far as the eye could see, was a parallel to a horizontal line. End quote. The following version was recorded in the same journal of the same date, and was furnished by one of the committee, who had manifested a very marked aversion to the doctrine that the surface of all water is horizontal. Quote, a vertical looking-glass was suspended from the camera, and the horizon seen in it, as well as various other objects reflected, rising and falling with the eye. the water was seen in the glass to ascend from the base of the hoe to the horizon. The horizon appeared parallel to a horizontal line, end quote. It will be observed that the two reports are substantially the same and very strongly corroborate the remarks made at pages 15, 16, and 17, beginning of section 1. Indeed, no other report could have been given without the authors becoming subject to the charge of glaring, obstinate, and willful misrepresentation. What then has again been demonstrated? Well, that the surface of all water is horizontal, and that, therefore, the earth cannot possibly be anything other than a plane. All appearances to the contrary have been shown to be purely optical and adventitious. Another proof that the surface of the water is horizontal and that therefore the earth cannot be a globe is furnished by the following experiment, which was made in May 1864 on the new pier of Southsea near Portsmouth. Section 13, Image 2. A telescope was fixed upon a stand and directed across the water at Spithead to the pier head at Ryde in the Isle of Wight as shown in the subjoined diagram. The line of sight crossed a certain part of the funnel of one of the regular streamers trading between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight, and it was observed to cut or fall upon the same part during the whole of the passage to Ryde Pier, thus proving that the water between the two piers is horizontal because it was parallel to the line of sight from the telescope fixed at Southsea. If the earth were a globe, the channel between Ryde and Southsea would be an arc of a circle, and, as the distance across is 4.5 statute miles, the center of the arc would be 40 inches higher than the two sides, and the steamer would have ascended an inclined plane for 2.25 miles, or to the center of the channel, and afterwards descended for the same distance towards Ryde. This ascent and descent would have been marked by the line of sight falling 40 inches nearer to the deck of the streamer when on the center of the arc of water, as represented in the following diagram. This is section 13, number 3. But as the line of sight did not cut the steamer lower down when in the center of the channel, and no such ascent and descent was observed, it follows necessarily that the surface of the water between Southsea and the Isle of Wight is not convex, and therefore the earth as a whole is not a globe. The evidence against the doctrine of the earth's rotundity is so clear and perfect, and so completely fulfills the conditions required in special and independent investigations, that it is impossible for any person who can put aside the bias of previous education to avoid the opposite conclusion that the earth is a plane. This conclusion is greatly confirmed by the experience of mariners in regard to certain lighthouses. Where the light is fixed and very brilliant, it can be seen at a distance, which the present doctrine of the earth's rotundity would render altogether impossible. For the instance, at page 35 of Lighthouses in the World, the Ryde Pier light, erected in 1852, is described as a bright fixed light 21 feet above the high water and visible from an altitude of 10 feet at the distance of 12 nautical or 14 statute miles. The altitude of 10 feet would place the horizon at the distance of 4 statute miles from the observer. The square of the remaining 10 statute miles multiplied by 8 inches will give a fall or curvature downwards from the horizon of 66 feet. Deduct from this 21 feet, the altitude of the light, and we have 45 feet as the amount which the light would ought to be below the horizon. By the same authority, at page 39, the Bidston Hill Lighthouse near Liverpool is 228 feet above high water, one bright fixed light visible 23 nautical or very nearly 27 statute miles. Deducting 4 miles for the height of the observer, squaring the remaining 23 miles, and multiplying that product by 8 inches, we have a downward curvature of 352 feet. From this, deduct the altitude of the light to 28 feet, and there remains 124 feet as the distance which the light should be below the horizon. Again at page 40, quote, the lower light on the calf of man is 282 feet above the high water and is visible 23 nautical miles, end quote. The usual calculation will show that it ought to be 70 feet below the horizon. At page 41, the Cromer light is described as having an altitude of 274 feet above high water and is visible 23 nautical miles, whereas it ought to be, at that distance, 78 feet below the horizon. At page 9 it said, quote, "The coal fire, which once was used, on the Spurn Point lighthouse at the mouth of the Humber, which was constructed on a good principle for burning, has been seen 30 miles off. If the miles here given are nautical measure, they would be equal to 35 statute miles. Deducting 4 miles as the usual amount for the distance of the horizon, there will remain 31 miles, which is squared and multiplied by 8 inches, and will give 640 feet as the declination of the water from the horizon to the base of the lighthouse, the altitude of which is given at page 42 as 93 feet above high water. This amount deducted from the above 640 feet would still leave 547 feet as the distance at which the Spurn light ought to have been below the horizon. The two high Whitby lights are 240 feet above high water, see page 42, and are visible 23 nautical miles at sea. The proper calculation will be 102 feet below the horizon. At page 43, it is said that the lower Farne Island light is visible for 12 nautical or 14 statute miles, and the height above high water is 45 feet. The actual calculation will show that this light ought to be 67 feet below the horizon. The Heckingen light on the west coast of Norway, see page 54, is 66 feet above high water and visible 16 statute miles. It ought to be sunk beneath the horizon 30 feet. The Togem light, see page 55, on the Ringham Rock, west coast of Norway, is 51 feet high and is visible at 16 statute miles, but ought to be 45 feet below the horizon. The Rondo light, also the west coast of Norway, see page 55, is 161 feet high and is visible for 25 statute miles. The proper calculation will prove that it ought to be above 130 feet below the horizon. The Eggerø light on west point of island, south coast of Norway, see page 56, and which is fitted up with the first order of the dioptric lights, is visible for 28 statute miles, and the altitude above high water is at 154 feet. Making the usual calculation, we find this light ought to be depressed or sunk below the horizon 230 feet. The Dunkirk light on the north coast of France, see page 71, is 194 feet high and visible to 28 statute miles. The ordinary calculation will show that it ought to be 190 feet below the horizon. The Gulf Bay light on the west coast of France is said at page 77 to be visible 31 statute miles and to have an altitude of high water of 276 feet. At the distance given, it ought to be 210 feet below the horizon. Page 78, the Cordonon light on the river Gironde, west coast of France, is given as being visible 31 statute miles and is altitude 207 feet, which would give its depression below the horizon as nearly 280 feet. The light at Madras, page 104, on the Esplanade is 132 feet high and visible 28 statute miles, whereas at the distance it ought to be beneath the horizon above 250 feet, or should say greater than 250 feet below the horizon. The Port Nicholson light in New Zealand, erected in 1859, page 110, is visible 35 statute miles. The altitude is 420 feet above high water, and ought, if the water is convex, to be 220 feet below the horizon. The light on Cape Bonavista, Newfoundland, is 150 feet above high water and visible 35 statute miles, page 111. This will give on calculation for the Earth's rotundity 491 feet, that the light should be below the horizon. Many other cases could be given from the same work, shewing that the practical observations of mariners, engineers, and surveyors entirely ignore the doctrine that the Earth is a globe. The following cases taken from miscellaneous sources will be interesting, as bearing upon and leading to the same conclusion. In the Illustrated London News of October 20th, 1849, engraving is given of a new lighthouse erected on the Irish coast. The accompanying descriptive matter contains the following sentence: Ballycotton Island rises 170 feet above the level of the sea. The height of the lighthouse is 60 feet, including the lantern, giving the light an elevation of 230 feet, which is visible upwards of 35 miles to sea. If the 35 miles are nautical measure, the distance in statute miles would be over 40 miles, and allowing the usual distance for the horizon, there would be 36 miles from thence to the lighthouse. The square of 36 multiplied by 8 inches amounts to 864 feet. Deduct the total altitude of the lantern, 230 feet, and the remainder, 634 feet, is the distance which the light of Ballycotton ought to be below the horizon. In the Times newspaper of Monday, October 16th, 1854, in an account of Her Majesty's visit to Great Grimsby from Hull, the following paragraph occurs. Quote, "Their attention was, first, naturally directed to a gigantic tower which rises from the center pier to the height of 300 feet, and can be seen 60 miles out to sea." End quote. The 60 miles, if nautical, and this is always understood when referring to distances at sea, would make 70 statute miles, to which the fall of 8 inches belongs, and as all observations at sea are considered to be made at an elevation of 10 feet above the water, for which 4 miles must be deducted from the whole distance, 66 statute miles will remain, the square of which, multiplied by 8 inches, gives a declination towards the tower of 2,904 feet. Deducting from this the altitude of the tower, 300 feet, we obtain the startling conclusion that the tower should be at the distance at which is visible, 60 nautical miles, more than 2,600 feet below the horizon. The only modification which can be made or allowed in the preceding calculations is that for refraction, which is considered by surveyors generally to amount to about 1/12 of the altitude of the object observed. If we make this allowance, it will reduce the various quotients by 1/12, which is so little that the whole will be substantially the same. Take the last quotation as an instance. 2,600 feet divided by 12 gives 206, which deducted from 2,600 leaves 2,384 as the correct amount for refraction. End section 13.
Around 200 BCE, the Greek philosopher Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference by looking at the length of a shadow in Alexandria.
No, he assumed the Earth's circumference by assuming the Earth was a sphere, and assuming that sun rays come in at 90 degrees or at parallel lines, right angles to the parallel lines to one another, all basically just a wall of sunlight coming in all at the same direction. Now, this preposterous idea is clearly debunked when you look at the so-called crepuscular rays of sunlight, which obviously converge at a point and do not travel in parallel straight lines. Now, the ancient Greeks, you know, as you compared the idiocy of the Fertile Crescent goat herders or whatever, the ancient Greeks were sort of that stupid. They would hang out in these big colosseums, and they would notice that the sun cast, on all the columns in the little colosseums or whatever, the little temples that they had, that all of those shadows would be parallel to one another. And so that gave them the indication that, well, the sunlight must be traveling at straight lines. But that's not the case. Again, if you use these same observations in terms of the arc angles of the angles and distances of the shadow cast by the sun at high noon on 2 points along the same meridian line, if you assume the Earth is a sphere, then you get this, spherical curvature, and it shows the sun to be 93 million miles away. If you assume the Earth to be a plane, then it proves that the sun is much closer, and that is indeed confirmed by all sorts of observations. I mentioned the so-called crepuscular rays, but also if you study high-altitude weather balloon footage, like a lot of them, if you ever see the sun, which you normally do, it's always just apparently a couple of degrees above the horizon line. And if it's overhead, then, obviously you can't see it, but that's pretty rare. I mean, usually the sun, the weather balloon spins around and you'll eventually catch a glimpse of the sun, which is very close to the horizon line. This is not an object that's 93 million miles away. And again, this is all based on assuming curvature. So, we can't assume that the Earth is a sphere to prove that the Earth is a sphere. This is pseudoscience. I mean, it's good mathematics, the numbers work, but the numbers work in both models. You just have to take either presupposition. So either way, This doesn't prove anything. It's just an extrapolation based on a hypothesis, which takes an assumption that the Earth is a sphere.
The summer solstice, when he knew that the sun was in zenith in Syene, 800 kilometers south of there. Of course, more recent measurements give a more accurate result, but he was not far off at all. This is an experiment I would challenge any flat earther to make. On a flat Earth, the lengths of shadows of...
Okay, so this is where you've got it all wrong. If you've got these 2 points, how many hundreds of miles were they apart? I don't know. It's irrelevant, though. You've got all of these sun rays coming in at right angles, and that's ridiculous. The sun is much closer, and so you've got the sun rays coming in at, convergent angles to the sun. They would all converge to the sun. And so that's where you get this, if the sun was directly over the zenith here, you would have no shadow. However, you would get this the exact same shadow on a flat Earth with a sun that's about 4,000 miles up.
Similar objects in Alexandria and Syene would be practically the same.
Yeah, again, you're wrong, because this one here should be coming in at a right angle because the sun is directly overhead. So you're just being... I don't know if you're being disingenuous or if you're really just that stupid.
Unless the sun were so close that shadows would visibly diverge, which they don't. Of course.
Wait. Shadows would basically diverge, which they don't, but you just showed that the shadows diverged right here. So wait a minute. So the shadows do diverge, assuming that the Earth is, the sun is, all these rays are coming in at parallel lines. But we can't assume that the Earth is a plane and that the sun is much closer. You don't make any sense.
More recent measurements give a more accurate result, but he was not far off at all. This is an experiment I would challenge any flat earther to make. On a flat Earth, the lengths of shadows of similar objects in Alexandria and Syene would be practically the same.
Yeah, you're just way off. I mean, you're wrong. This is...
Unless the sun were so...
There, that's about right. Now, the sun isn't this close, but that's about accurate. I mean, you did get this right, and you would have the exact same effect that's on a sphere Earth on a plane. So again, the flat Earth model necessitates that the sun is a local body, and so we need to pursue evidence to see whether or not that's the case. And we need to get well off the ground to do it, because the atmosphere and the different layers of electromagnetic fields and even ionized plasma tubes running meridionally in the lower magnetosphere cause a lot of distortions and well, bending of light and that sort of thing that we little tiny observers on the ground are not really capable of seeing the full picture, and so we have to do widespread scientific testing. We can't just take one observation or repeat similar experiments with the same assumptions. We've got to use different assumptions. So this is a good, I mean, I really like what you've done here, but I know you're just going to try to trash it.
Close that shadows would visibly diverge, which they don't.
Which they don't. They do, but they don't. The shadows diverge, but they don't. Again, if you were, if the sun is closer, and you're standing in a coliseum with all these columns, yeah, they're going to cast parallel shadows where you're standing. However, if you were to move 500 miles over to the north or the south or east, west, whatever, then those angles are still going to be parallel to that observer, but they're going to be convergent with the other observer that we just mentioned. So yes, these lines the sun rays do appear to converge at the sun. There is not this wall of parallel light coming down to a curved Earth. It's just not. That's not what's happening, and we can, I can provide repeatable evidence to show this.
Of course, flat earthers today either look at parallel shadows and deny that they're parallel.
No, we're not denying that it's parallel. We're saying that it's parallel locally, but convergent to the sun, depending on your relative position to the sun.
Or they reject the conclusion of the experiment by rejecting high school geometry.
No, we're rejecting the assumption that the entire experiment is based upon. Again, the assumption is that all of the sun rays are coming in at parallel lines, and we live on a curved globe. Okay, So that's an assumption, but when you test that assumption, it is wrong. The sun is actually closer, and the sun rays are convergent, not coming in at this wall of parallel lines light.
Either way, they reject what is easily and directly demonstrable.
And again, I could tattoo your name right here on this girl's forehead, and it would be totally honest and honorable to do so.
And they won't accept this challenge, not even to spite.
Oh, I'll accept the challenge, and I will show you, and I've discussed it, but I'll give you some examples, how wrong you are. And it's laughable. I'm not trying to pick on you, but really, you need to open your eyes, you need to wake up, and you need to actually approach this scientifically, which means to test all hypotheses and come closer to the truth. There's nothing to be ashamed of to take different assumptions than the ancient Greeks had. Ptolemy did. We're doing it, and it actually it's proven to be very enlightening. And it's just it's a shame that you simply refuse to look at this and take your belief system and try to project that onto the truth, our quote-unquote belief system or our understanding of the truth. And that's just, you're the opposite of a scientist. You are really a dogmatic religious zealot trying to apply your paradigm onto something that is incompatible with your paradigm, because your paradigm is fallacious, and so the truth is incompatible with what you believe.
Me after hearing me say this. Instead, they will come up with excuses for why they can't personally accept the challenge. I can't travel far enough because it'll cost too much, or I would, but I don't have the time to spare.
Wait a minute, really? So you're going to say that people have really made that claim to you? We don't need to travel to prove this. There's plenty of documentation and observations that we can make, and books that we can read, and softwares that we can use, and just all sorts of different things that we can do to show this in one model or another. So I'm reading that you say it's not that they believe it because it's been shown to be true, which that's wrong. I know this is true. I know the Earth is a stationary plane, and I realize fully well, understanding the heliocentric model for the majority of my life, that is actually fallacious. It's wrong. It's preposterous, actually, when you give it even the slightest inkling of scrutiny. Your second thing here is it's not that they believe it because it hasn't been shown to be false, which it hasn't. It's not even that they believe it because they can't show it to be false. What are you talking about? This doesn't even make any sense.
And since they wouldn't believe anyone else who says it turned out the way I predicted, that means they can't be convinced that they're wrong. They won't put their beliefs to the test, but they'll still claim that they know the truth and
see, now this right here is just so, it's just so hypocritical and ironic that you would take this position and keep pulling up this picture of this girl plugging her ears and closing her eyes when that's exactly what you're doing. Again, me, myself, and a lot of other very smart, intelligent, and credible flat earthers out there, we're fully well aware of what your belief system is in terms of the heliocentric model. We've actually taken a look at this other alternative model and found that it actually fits with all of our observations, and it actually is the truth. Now, for you to basically not study the alternative model and plug your ears and close your eyes to it, claiming that your belief system has been proven when it hasn't, it's just ridiculous, man. Really, I really hope that you wake up to this, because you're making yourself really look bad. And if you were going to debunk the flat Earth, I wished you would actually understand it first.
Have proof that the Earth is flat.
The next few observations made historically that confirm that the Earth is indeed a spheroid are also observations that anyone can make if you're just willing to travel. But as we've established, flat earthers aren't.
First off, it's possible to sail around the Earth.
So you're saying that flat earthers aren't willing to travel. That's a pretty broad stereotype, Really? Now, me personally, I've never left the United States, so, okay, that's just me. But I know lots of well-traveled flat earthers, tons of them. So, I mean, just because we're the minority, it doesn't mean that you can stereotype us with anything you want. Should I say that all globe earthers don't want to travel to prove the Earth is a globe? So are you going to go circumnavigate the world, Martymer? Is that what you're saying? You're going to go circumnavigate the world? Okay, when you do it, I want you to do it from north to south. Do it in a plane, and then come all the way back around the South Pole and come all the way back up to the North Pole. If you can do that, I'll give you $1 million, and I'll be a globe earther.
Now this isn't the convincing part, because flat earthers believe that north means toward the center of the disc-shaped Earth, and east and west simply refer to the directions perpendicular to north. What should be convincing, however, is what happens when you cross the equator, which the Europeans had to do in order to sail around the world prior to the building of the Suez and Panama Canals.
Okay, I'm with you so far. Nothing bad said so far. Okay.
Turns out the stars on the southern hemisphere don't appear to orbit Polaris, but a point near the star Sigma Octantis.
Okay, so we're going to go looking at the stars to prove that the Earth is a spinning sphere. Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to demonstrate the Jeranism effect, which uses the stars to prove that the Earth isn't a spinning sphere, and then what you're going to say about that. So we have sort of an impasse here where obviously, and this is a point of contention for me and something that I've been struggling with, but obviously the little lights in the night sky are not excellent indicators of what's going on in reality. Now, the principle that I'll explain to you here real quick, and I've coined it the Jeranism effect, much to Jaren's dismay, I'm sure, but gotta love the guy. Basically, this principle is that the visible stars during the winter should be, especially from, say, at the equator, facing 90 degrees overhead, should be on the opposite end of the universe than the stars 6 months later. But actually, in fact, somewhere on the Earth, somebody can see all of the same stars all year long, for hundreds and hundreds of years, with the North Pole star Polaris being that guiding star in the north for all this time, in spite of the so-called axial precession, which would throw off our alignment to that 25.5 quadrillion, 2.5 quadrillion miles away Polaris. If our axis of rotation was indeed precessing 1 degree every 72 years or so, then we should have a new North Star every 50 or 100 years at the most. And that's not even considering the preposterous idea that the Sun is carrying it along with us at 500,000 miles an hour along the galactic center. Oy vey. But, yeah, this whole rotating in the southern hemisphere stars is it's a fallacy, for one thing. Yeah, you can show stellarium that obviously that's going to work in, but first of all, if you're in the southern hemisphere, you can't see the Southern Cross or the like Sigma Octantis or the Octans constellation from all points in the southern hemisphere, but you can see the North Star Polaris from all points in the northern hemisphere. And in fact, this is another really important point. The North Pole star Polaris has been observed as far as the southern tropic of Capricorn. So if the Earth was a sphere, that would be physically impossible. And I'll give a diagram. For example, your line of sight would always be a tangent to the curve of the Earth, even when dealing with the night sky. And so if you're standing as far south as Capricorn, your line of sight would never converge with the line of light from Polaris. Never. And so the simple fact that Polaris can be viewed from the equator and as far south as Capricorn proves conclusively that the Earth isn't a sphere.
And they're not the same stars. Also, the moon is upside down. And here's the real kicker. Paths on the southern hemisphere converge as they go further south.
The moon is upside down. Okay, I'll have to throw up a diagram because that is not exclusive to a sphere. if you're in the northern hemisphere, or the central semiplane, and you look up at the moon, and you'll see, you know, say the top facing you and the bottom facing the other way, just for one example. And then if you instantaneously traveled to the southern hemisphere, and in the flat Earth model, you'd be facing the opposite direction, you'd be seeing the, you know, top towards you and the bottom facing the other way. So you can do an experiment to sort of understand what I'm saying here is tape a quarter to your ceiling with the head up towards you, and then walk to the other side of your room and observe the same quarter, and you'll see that the head is you know, pointed away from you. Now, does that mean your room is a sphere, or does that mean that the quarter is relatively close and you simply changed your relative position, and that parallax has changed your perspective of it?
And here's the real kicker. Paths on the southern hemisphere converge as they go further south, just like on the northern hemisphere.
That's assumed. You're saying that the meridian lines converge at the point on a bottom of a sphere. Yeah, we understand that that's assumed, but if you actually do your research into this, the really tough explorers that were really all about, you know, they dedicated their lives and they were commissioned to, you know, explore uncharted lands and circumnavigate the globe. But these guys always had a really tough time circumnavigating the southern polar area, Antarctica. They, for some reason, as much as they tried, and there was lots of different, very well respected and experienced captains who really tried to go all the way around Antarctica and just simply never could. They could, you know, they would just keep going and going and going and never make their way back around, and so that never happened. And furthermore, in terms of circumnavigation, it's never been done from, you know, the North Pole down around to the South Pole, up around to the North Pole. And I would even suffice to start in Alaska and go down around the South Pole and up back around the North Pole and land back in Alaska. That would be good enough, but that's never been done. It's always done east to west because circumnavigation is impossible north to south on the stationary plane Earth.
Hemisphere when they go further north. This cannot be if the Earth is a flat disk or any shape other than a spheroid.
Yeah, and see, you're getting at something here. Your beliefs are incompatible with the truth. That's a very good point. So your beliefs are incompatible with the truth. You believe that the longitude lines converge at a point back at the bottom of a sphere, but you've surely never observed it. And in fact, the lines of longitude have only ever been measured and confirmed north of the equator, and they've always just assumed to converge back at a point at the bottom of a sphere. And that's why I think we've got a lot of issues with the latitude and longitude lines, because a lot of what you see here, like really where you've got your red arrows drawn, is assumption. That's globe Earth or flat Earth. Now you can say it's sufficient to measure degrees of latitude and longitude, you know, on the ground in reality in the northern hemisphere, and extrapolate, you know, that mirror image, or sort of assume that there's this bilateral symmetry in the south. But that isn't science. That's extrapolation, and it needs to be, you know, it needs to be confirmed or proven. And if you look into the expeditions of Admiral Richard E. Byrd, he was an admiral for the U.S. Navy. He did several southern polar expeditions, and Admiral Byrd found all sorts of really wild, unexpected things in the Antarctic, including allegedly really high, you know, deposits of ore and fuel and plutonium and probably gold and that sort of thing. It's an untouched continent, and yet we never went back. And he also made some pretty astounding remarks about his adventures down there. But I'll let you look into that. I don't want to, you know, paraphrase anything, but just research Richard E. Byrd's polar expedition. Now, there's some pretty good physical evidence that there is not this bilateral symmetry that would be absolutely necessary if the Earth was a sphere, and one of those would be barometric pressure. I don't know if you're aware of this, but barometric pressure is highest in the north, and gradually gets lower and lower and lower till you get to the equator. Now, I'm sure you would expect the barometric pressure to increase higher and higher and higher as you get back towards the bottom of the globe, right? But in fact, the barometric pressure continues to decrease even beyond the equator and gets less and less and less all the way down to Antarctica. So the barometric pressure is lowest at the South Pole, quote unquote, and highest in the center. So that means that there is not this bilateral symmetry that you would expect on a sphere. And there are other things too, but we won't get into all that. You're just taking the assumption that these latitude and longitude lines converge back into a point at the bottom of the sphere, and you say that this is impossible on a flat Earth. Well, I tell you that these longitude lines do not converge back into a point at the bottom of a sphere. So therefore, the globe is impossible.
Today, the fact that paths converge on the southern hemisphere is undeniable, since as anyone with a cash to blow could confirm, you can travel to the South Pole from either Punta Arenas, Chile, or Cape Town, South Africa.
Okay, wait a minute now. So, you're saying that they travel to the South Pole, but that's ridiculous. You're being so disingenuous, it's not even funny. Really, when they go to the South Pole, they're going to this continent here, especially from the southern tip of, what is that? South America, it looks like. I don't know, maybe that's Africa, I can't tell. Irrelevant. This sort of skullduggery here is so common because you're claiming that they're all meeting up here at this point, when in fact, you know, the America has their slice, Australia has their slice. All of these little 52 countries all have their little slices, but those slices actually are scattered around the sides. And so if you travel south to the South Pole from South America, you're going to wind up here. If you travel south to the South Pole from Africa, you're going to wind up here. If you travel south to the South Pole from Australia or New Zealand, you're going to wind up there and there. And again, this is an azimuthal equidistant projection. So I'm not sure how accurate this is. I'm really not. Again, this is taking the assumed globe Earth and just basically putting it in azimuthal equidistant projection. I've already explained what that is. So this could actually be wrong. We could have something a little bit different than this. Now, this is sort of conventionally accepted, but again, it's all based on observations of the sun and then extrapolations of latitude and longitude lines. I think this stuff needs to be measured, scientifically measured. I think that we need a full geodetic survey of the entire South Pole. Now, the only such thing that's ever allegedly been done was done in the 1950s by, again, Captain or Admiral Richard E. Byrd on a big operation they called High Jump.
Admiral, you speak of the resources of Antarctica. What are they? What are the natural resources there?
Well, we've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
Well,
that's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the well. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter.
Well,
it was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
are there that many expeditions now there or en route there?
Well, you know, as I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
Our distinguished guest was Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
Where they actually sent a few thousand, like a bunch of big icebreakers and a bunch of, tankers, ships, whatever, thousands of soldiers, Navy men, whatever, and they went very, very close to the South Pole, and then Admiral Byrd himself flew beyond the South Pole, and this is the first time ever he got way further past anyone that had ever tried to get even close to where he was getting, because he had a airplane. He had just launched it off of a aircraft carrier, right? When he returned, he said that there was a landmass greater than the Americas south of the South Pole. So that's incompatible with the doctrine of rotundity.
Any shape other than a spheroid. Today, the fact that paths converge on the southern hemisphere
The assumption that paths converge on the southern hemisphere
is undeniable, since as
is deniable.
anyone with a cash to blow could confirm, you can travel to the South Pole from either.
Yes, you can travel to the southernmost region from either of these places, but they don't go here. I think like the farthest south they really go is about here. They've got some sort of, I think Great Britain has an observatory somewhere here, or actually I don't even think it's on the continent itself, it's on the ice shelf, so it's like out here in the water, maybe around here somewhere. I'm not exactly sure, but it's right around in this general vicinity, and that's sort of the research station for the Great Britain. The little tourist flights that come from Australia, they do some little swooping figure 8 patterns and then come home. But again, this all works the same way on a flat Earth map. They're just not going anywhere near each other. They're actually going in opposite directions.
Punta Arenas, Chile, or Cape Town, South Africa. Yes, tours are offered commercially, though the
Yes, tours are offered commercially. Yes, they are. But I bet you, and I bet you haven't done this, and I bet you nobody's done this. I bet you nobody's taken a plane from here to here and landed. And then somebody else took a plane from here to here and landed, you know, both going south, and met up and said, hey, and had some, you know, snow cones and coffee and then left. That's never happened, so this is all assumption. It's not science. It's assumption.
will set you back some $50,000. Still, the fact remains that you'll reach the same point whether you go from Africa or South America.
That's a lie. You're being disingenuous. These tours that they take, they don't go to the same place. Your argument is preposterous.
Which flat earthers say you won't. But you don't have to go all the way to the South Pole. Just travel around the Antarctic, or just from South Africa to Argentina, and you'll notice that the trip is a lot shorter than flat earthers will claim.
Okay, let's back that up real quick. So first of all, nobody has ever circumnavigated Antarctica. Okay?
South Africa to Argentina, and you'll
Okay, second of all,
notice
you're South Africa from Argentina.
that the trip is a lot shorter.
Again, this is an azimuthal equidistant projection. So this right here is exaggerated, it's skewed, it's stretched out because it's far south of the equator. Let me just roll another clip because I'm so tired of having to do the same arguments, but it is, it's almost like the show The Walking Dead, one of my favorite shows. It's like there's so many brain dead zombies out there, and it's like no matter how many, you can't save them all. Well, you can't save any of them in that show, but you can't kill them all. I'm not a violent person, so it is just an analogy. It's almost like it gets very frustrating because you only have so many bullets, and it's like, at least argumentative bullets we can use more than once, but it does get sort of redundant. I will roll a clip showing that the distance from here to here is, let's see, I think it's 6,000 miles. From here to here, 8,000, and from here to here is 8,000. Okay, so these distances are skewed because this is an azimuthal equidistant projection. Now, furthermore, if you add up these far southern points, the southernmost capes of these far south continents, right? So like right here, there's capes at the very far southern tips of these continents. I think there's one here. If you add up these distances, and again, this is not 50,000 miles or something here. It's like 8,000, 8,000, and 6,000 for a total of 22,000. But that's nautical miles. When converted to statute miles, it's actually a greater distance than ever ascribed to that of the equator. So if the equator is the greatest circumference, or the circumference of the Earth, traveling in an east to west fashion, then if you travel south of the equator, how could that average 45-degree longitude south be wider around? And this is not just theory, this is actual documentation of mariners who did these far southern excursions. How could that possibly be wider around than the equator? Now, I'm not saying that it's this much wider around, because again, this is exaggerated, and I've used a couple of different models to show how this might actually work a little bit differently than what you think, but I'm not going to get that far into it. I'd much rather you do the research yourself and at least realize that the reason we really have to go this far into this is only because you're so stubborn. The Earth isn't curved, there's no sphericity, and it's not spinning. Again, those are the fundamental pillars of my argument, and I can provide, proof for that. But so far, it's like you're picking apart all these red herring arguments that are non-arguments. It's just so very typical of ignorant globe earthers who haven't taken the time to actually look at the flat Earth evidence because you think it's stupid. Well, that's the opposite of science. I'm sorry. You have nailed it if you want to be anti-scientific.
Harder than flat earthers will claim. Another thing travelers would notice is that if you do travel around the world, you will gain or lose a full day. I'm not talking about time dilation here. I mean, you'd simply be wrong about what the current date is. This is of course because you have traveled through what we today refer to as 24 different time zones. You will have crossed the date line. On a flat Earth, the sun is either up or down, period.
Whoa, okay, so you are really way off here. You're saying that the sun goes below the Earth? What flat Earth model are you looking at? The Martymer ignis flat Earth model? This isn't what's occurring. You really think that rational adults who've lived on planet Earth their entire lives are not familiar with this thing called day and night, and like we didn't think about this, or this doesn't have an explanation in the actual flat Earth model, not the Martymer ignis flat Earth model, but the actual flat Earth model? Wow, man, you are just like way out there. Are you feeling okay?
It will be day everywhere on the disk or night everywhere on the disk. The sun rises and sets at the same time of day.
Okay, no. You said
it will be day everywhere on the disk or night everywhere on the disk.
This is ridiculous. The sun goes in circuits around the Earth. You can't see the sun all the time because of perspective and because of vastness of the plane, the Earth. You haven't looked into this, Martymer. You're coming from a position of ignorance, and you're trying to debunk something using just fallacy. Again, you're bringing a cake to a knife fight. Does that make sense? You brought a soccer ball to a baseball game. I don't know how other way to put it, but you're trying to infuse your belief system into the flat Earth model, which makes it all preposterous. Of course it does, because your model is preposterous. And so when you try to apply your preposterous belief system to the truth, then of course the truth is going to seem preposterous. That's not how science works. You have to start with a premise, and then, develop hypotheses, and then do, make observations, experiments, and if your experiments either align with the hypotheses or falsify your hypotheses, you know how to proceed. But for you to just, cough forth such wild speculation and just regurgitate your belief system all over the truth, making it this filthy mess, is, it's just so typical. But, I thought we were going to have a little bit better from you. You're a pretty hot shot dude. I mean, look at you.
For everyone, there are no time zones. Excuses include that the sun is like a spotlight, but this obviously doesn't matter when you can clearly see how it rises and sets. The spotlight is either above the disk, above the horizon, or beneath it. It can't.
No, no, no. This has to do with perspective. Oh god. Yeah, I already clipped in that lesson on perspective, so hopefully maybe one day Martymer will watch this and understand what an ignoramus he is.
Be above the horizon as seen from one point on the disk, but beneath it as seen from another.
Okay, yeah, again, you're all wrong. You've got this disk floating around in space with the sun going under it. Where are you coming up with this stuff? You just pull this stuff out of your rear? You just make it up as you go along? The sun goes beneath the disk? Oh, I see. You got all your information from the Flat Earth Society. It's a misinformation campaign to basically, well, bring out some good arguments for the Flat Earth and then demolish the whole thing with these preposterous, ideas like you're pointing out here. I mean, this is just gross misrepresentation of any Flat Earth model I've ever seen. And your idea of the universe and space is obviously being forced into this sort of model when, I hate to break it to you, Martymer, infinite space doesn't exist. The Big Bang never happened. The Earth is actually special and the centerpiece of the entire known universe, upon which or above which all of these celestial bodies orbit in concentric circles around the North Pole star. So, yeah, I'm not sure where you came up with this, but it's a little bit freaky.
That's a magical property that spotlights don't actually have.
And no, the sun doesn't act like a spotlight. I'll just roll a clip of Drew 77777's Flat Earth working model, because it shows on an azimuthal equidistant projection that the sun is not acting like a spotlight. And I believe this has a lot to do with the, visible light is just a certain spectrum of diffused electromagnetic waves. And if the source light, or the sun, is not visible from space, which it isn't, that those electromagnetic waves coming from the sun clash with our magnetosphere and our atmosphere. There's sort of a diffusion, D-I-F-F-U, diffusion that goes on, where the invisible electromagnetic spectrum is sort of rendered or diffused into the visible spectrum. But back to your non-point, the sun never actually goes beneath the Earth or around the Earth, under it. It goes around the Earth, and it's essentially always on the same plane above the Earth. However, according to us, according to our perspective here on the ground, the sun appears to set. That's due to the operations, again, of perspective. The sun is traveling along and around a very high up plane, maybe 4,000 miles up, and so when it's directly overhead at noon, several hours later when the sun appears to sink lower and lower and lower, you'll notice that that angle is aligned with the operation of perspective, but the sun never actually dips beneath the Earth. So just want to make sure you're clear on that as well.
While on the subject of magic, that's what flat earthers would have to cite in order to explain why gravity behaves the way it does. They will...
Why gravity behaves the way it does? Magic? No, it's the simple laws of density and buoyancy, Martymer. Density and buoyancy. Again, gravity is only necessary if the Earth is a spinning sphere. Since the Earth isn't a spinning sphere, we don't need gravity. And in fact, the well-known, well-documented laws of density and buoyancy prove that your understanding of gravity is fallacious. So you believe that gravity, and I'm sure in an Einsteinian sense, that the space-time is this rectilinear fabric, space meshed together with the human construct of time, which is all sort of a bizarre theory from some dead dude named Albert, whom you think is a genius. But if an apple falls from a tree, then that means it is more dense than the air surrounding it. Now, when that apple hits the ground, it's obviously not going to fall beneath the ground. Now, if it was in water, I guess it would still float, but it might dip a little bit. But when it hits the ground, then it's not going to drop any further. Now, that isn't gravity, it's just density and buoyancy. I don't know if you know this, but the barometric pressure, at about sea level, is around 14 or maybe 14.7 pounds per square inch. And so that means that even while we do have sort of a buoyant force as well applied on us, we also have all of this constant barometric pressure essentially keeping us held together. I mean, if you go into a zero pressure environment, you're going to have all sorts of problems. You're like going to explode. But even like slight variations in pressure, like you can get the bends from either scuba diving and coming up too quickly. You can get the bends from going up into long-term high-altitude flight without pressurized cabin, and then landing too quickly. So this all has to do with barometric pressure. Barometric density and buoyancy is what allows a 100-ton steel ship to float on water. It's what allows a hot air balloon to rise. It's what causes an apple to fall. It's what allows a helium balloon to rise. It's based on pressure, density, and temperature. And so the fundamental laws of density and buoyancy are perfectly adequate to explain what goes up must come down. Now, I realize that you think what goes up must come down is some very complex and sophisticated group of theories supporting it, but in fact on the flat earth model it's very simple. What goes up must come down, just because it's the natural order of things. Heavier, denser objects tend towards the ground, and lighter, less dense objects tend to rise from the ground. That's just the way it works. It's the natural order of things. It's like an unshaken vinaigrette will be in layers. If you shake it up, set it down for some time, it'll mix up. Then that oil and vinegar and the different seasonings will sort of turn into their, rest back into their layers. That's density and buoyancy in play. It has nothing to do with gravity.
Argue that the Earth, and presumably everything else in the universe, accelerates upwards at 1g.
No, that's ridiculous. See, this is where I know that you are just citing information from the Flat Earth Society. They're putting out bogus information for people like you who Google search, why is Flat Earth stupid? And then you find the Flat Earth Society and you do all this brilliant research into a bunch of just skullduggery. It's preposterous. No, the Earth isn't rising up at 1g or 9.8 meters per second squared. The Earth is fixed and immovable, and what causes objects to fall is just, they're denser than the surrounding air, and that barometric pressure, 14.7 pounds per square inch, is going to force that object down towards the ground. Now, there is the argument that in order for density and buoyancy to work, you must have some fundamental up and some fundamental down. However, this doesn't need gravitics whatsoever, especially on a flat Earth model. I tend to think of density as sort of a frequency. And if, say, an apple or a brick that you drop from the top of a building is going to be resonating with a similar frequency to that of the ground, and so therefore there is some form of an attraction, or at least a tendency for the heavier, denser objects to be compelled towards the ground, and the indeed very brutish 14.7 pounds per square inch barometric pressure applied to any object will cause it to free fall and smack against the ground. But it has nothing to do with gravity in terms of a warping of space-time. Again, that's all theoretical based on the assumption that the Earth is a spinning sphere, which it is not.
Fails to explain why everything in the universe behaves as though massive bodies attract each other. It also...
Everything else in the universe behaves as if massive objects attract each other. Okay. So you're going on a lot of assumptions here. A lot. Now, first of all, when you say in the universe, you're talking about like the little dots of light you can see in the night sky. Let me ask you a question, Marty. Have you ever seen massive, dense objects attracted to one another in any sort of scientific demonstration? And please don't quote the Cavendish experiments where he supposedly figured up the weight of the Earth hanging 4 balls in his tool shed. This experiment is assuming a lot, but it's also never been replicated. I'm just disgusted with the level of ignorance, and I can't blame you or people like you, because you have been fairly well programmed and indoctrinated into this belief system. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you, but it's just very difficult to see this sort of just blatant misrepresentation. You're either being disingenuous or you're just a very poor researcher. I'm not sure.
Fails to explain why gravity is weaker at high altitude and near the equator.
Nope, actually it does. Gravity isn't weaker at high altitude. There's less barometric pressure at high altitude. Same thing at the very center at the North Pole. There's actually like I said, there's a higher barometric pressure here. So a ton of coffee at the North Pole will weigh slightly less at the equator. Just slightly. It's just a very slight change. Now this is where I have a problem with the spinning sphere. If the Earth was a spinning sphere, then the object, a ton of coffee at the equator, would be, well, basically perpendicular to the axis, which is 4,000 miles away, at the core of the Earth. Zipping around a curve over 1,000 miles an hour, faster than the speed of sound, and dropping vertically at over 700,000 feet per hour, or about 135, 136 miles an hour at the equator, which would be like the second fastest roller coaster in the world. Of course, that's just the vertical droppage. We're not even talking about the eastward 1,037.5 mile an hour spinning. No roller coasters go anywhere near 1,000. But at any rate, the ton of coffee at the North Pole weighs slightly more than it does at the equator. And, physicists and mathematicians will back engineer this observation to neatly align with their theory of gravity. But here's the fact, though. If the Earth was actually a spinning sphere, an object with greater and greater mass should experience less and less weight at the equator. Okay? Furthermore, when you're at the North Pole, as opposed to the equator, you're spinning half the speed as the hour hand on a clock. If the Earth was a spinning globe, you're spinning half the speed as the hour hand on a clock and standing above, on top of, parallel with the axis. So there's essentially no centripetal force generated by a globe at the pole. However, at the equator, there should be a great deal of centripetal force, almost an infinitely greater than the North Pole. And so what I'm saying is that as mass is increased at the equator, then an object should get lighter and lighter and lighter. To give you an example, if you take a 1 pound weights and grab one in each hand, stretch your arms out to your side, and then spin around, if you were to increase those weights to 10-pound weights and subsequently spin at the same rate that you were just doing before, you'd find that the outward tug on your arms would be greater with the more, the heavier, the more massive weights. And so using this very simple logic and physics, objects near the equator should experience decreased weight with increased mass. But instead, that's not what happens. We all know that regardless of your latitude, the more massive an object, the heavier it gets. So that disproves your little theory of spinning globe and gravity, but this whole thing here is bull. This is just a lie. Nobody except for maybe the Flat Earth Society claims this. Gravity is just barometric pressure, density and buoyancy. That's it.
This is of course because the strength of gravity depends on the distance to the center of mass, which isn't the same everywhere on the Earth's surface, since it's not a perfect sphere. And it definitely isn't the same if you're a significant distance above the surface either.
Again, you're still assuming gravity, which is a theory that has never been proven, demonstrated. And no, you can't drop your pen to prove gravity. Dropping your pen is a demonstration of what goes up must come down, Martymer. that is not proof of the theory of gravity. Now, I don't know if you caught this, but recently, LIGO, hint, hint, LIGO, they claim to have observed a binary supermassive black hole collision, which allegedly produced gravity waves for the first time ever. But really all they saw was a blip on a chart. And then they took some very spectacular CGI animations to convince people that we finally found black holes and gravity waves. But in fact, LIGO is lying. And I can even roll a clip from that.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have detected gravitational waves. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that. So these gravitational waves were produced by two colliding black holes that came together, merged to form a single black hole about 1.3 billion years ago. They were detected by LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. LIGO is the most precise measuring device ever built. Let me start with what we saw. So on September 14th, 2015, the two LIGO observatories in Hanford, Washington, and Livingston, Louisiana, recorded a signal nearly at the same time, nearly simultaneously, and the signal had a very specific characteristic. The characteristic of, as time went forward, the frequency went up. And what was amazing about this signal is that it's exactly what you would expect, what Einstein's theory of general relativity would predict for two big massive objects like black holes in spiraling and merging together. Now, it took us months of careful checking, rechecking, analysis, looking at every piece of data to make sure that what we saw was not something that wasn't a gravitational wave, but in fact it was a gravitational wave. And we've convinced ourselves that's the case, and we're here to announce that today. But I do want to say something else.
Nor can they explain the horizon. On a flat Earth, the horizon would be the edge, or where the firmament meets the Earth. Yes, they believe in that.
No, we don't. You're a liar. The horizon is the vanishing point. It's completely subjective. That's not the edge of the Earth. If you're 6 foot tall, standing at the sea level, you can see about 3.5 miles out to sea. That's going to be your apparent horizon. Now, objects that travel beyond that apparent horizon are going to appear to dip beneath that line just simply because of perspective, and even a 3-foot swell in front of that distant object will appear to completely, obscure your vision of it. So, yeah, no, you're wrong. That's not the edge of the Earth, that's your apparent horizon. It's subjective. The horizon is always a straight line, indeed, regardless of altitude, but it's always an equidistant circle around you, or even an equidistant hemisphere around and above you. And when you get up to high enough altitudes, an equidistant circle all the way around you. It is a sphere around you, but that doesn't mean you live in a sphere. It just means you can't see to infinity on the infinite plane. First of all, you've got atmospheric refraction. Then, of course, you've got perspective. So, like I'm sure you would claim that if the Earth was flat, that you should be able to see the coast of England from the east coast of the United States, right? I'm sure that's one of your arguments, I would imagine. But even if the Earth was totally flat without even a ripple in the sea, because of the laws of perspective, I think it's 3,500 miles across the sea, across the pond. The most tall skyscraper in London would be microscopic from the East Coast, even if you could see through that much atmosphere, which you can't. So, I mean, come on, really? You really think that atmospheric refraction, we haven't observed this, or this observation is somehow indicative of a globe, or your ignorance of this topic in general proves that you don't understand what the hell you're talking about, and maybe that's it?
At least some of them. But then we shouldn't see things disappear across the horizon, since they don't cross the horizon until they fall off the Earth.
Wait a minute. Things disappear behind the horizon because of perspective. You're an idiot.
Some flat earthers have claimed that the reason you can't see across the Atlantic is that the atmosphere becomes opaque over such a great distance. But this also means that that's the reason why ships disappear. But they wouldn't appear to sink in that case.
Oh God, yes, they do appear to sink. They do indeed. But unfortunately, they can be restored with a telescope, so they didn't sink. It's just perspective. And again, if you do that experiment and have a secondary observer watching the entire sequence perpendicular to your line of sight, then that ship never went over any sort of hump. It just went from left to right, according to him. But according to you, this ship went over several series of humps, depending on your binoculars or telescopes. So, wow, man, wow.
Instead, the wavelengths of light reflecting off it would be gradually filtered out, first violet, then blue, and along the spectrum all the way to red. Just like how the sky becomes red at sunset when the...
So you're denying perspective. You're denying that objects appear to get shorter and shorter as they gain distance? You're denying that? Okay, so you are anti-scientific.
Sunlight has to travel further through the atmosphere than in the middle of the day. Eventually red would be filtered out as well, and the ship would simply fade away, but we would still be able to detect it on our radar, since radio waves are way longer than red light.
And you know what's funny? If you actually talk to people who are open to this, who have been in like the Navy and the military, they'll tell you plain as day that they can lock on with a laser target to targets that are 100 and even 200 miles away at sea with perfect line of sight. Now, of course, that's well beyond anything that you're going to visibly be able to see. But, you know, the equipment and technology that they have, it is based on direct line of sight and triangulation, but using, you know, essentially lasers or even radar at long distances across the plane. They can get laser dot target acquisitions from the ship at 100 or even 200 miles. So this right here alone proves that this curvature that you believe exists does not.
And of course we can't. But here's the funniest part. Why, if this were the case, can we see celestial bodies supposedly attached to the firmament, which is further away than the ship that is too far away to be seen?
Oh God. First of all, you don't have any understanding of perspective. This line right here would represent, if you're about 6 foot tall, about 3.5 miles away. Now, this ship right here is obviously far beyond the 3.5 mile mark, but if it were to continue beyond and keep going straight out that way, it would appear to vanish. But then if you zoomed back in on it, it would reappear. The celestial bodies are a horse of a different color. Even though the sun appears to be very near the ground, it's actually not. It's just like anything else with perspective. The sun remains on the same plane essentially, but as it travels away from you, it appears to get lower and lower and lower until it sets. But it didn't go beneath the disk a couple hundred miles away, Martymer. It's just like anything else. It drops below your line of sight, and the ground horizon actually obscures anything beyond that point. Now, granted, the sun isn't nearly as close as this ship. It's just much more higher up. You have to understand how perspective works. Objects near your line of sight will appear to converge with the horizon much more closely, while objects far removed from your line of sight will indeed vanish on that same datum line, but far more distantly on that datum line. Okay, so this is just fundamental laws of perspective that adequately explain sunrise and sunset. And the fact that you claim that we don't have an argument for this is just, it's ridiculous, and it's telling that you either haven't done your research or you're just going to argue this for the sake of arguing it. Getting a little chilly?
Magic, bitch. That's why.
So in conclusion, the idea that the...
No, and you want a magic, bitch. What about gravity? everything that you can't explain is gravity. And I guarantee you that's going to be your answers to all of the following questions. How is it possible for the upper atmosphere to be adjacent to the infinite vacuum of space without anything separating the two? What goes up must come down. How is it possible for the Earth to be essentially chained to the sun, spinning around the sun, without any sort of chain, except for the infinite vacuum of space? In the heliocentric model, according to Hubble, they claim that there are galaxies out there that are spinning so fast that the known laws of gravity would not allow for them to hold their shape. And so, how is this possible? And I already know your answer, so I won't even do the whole thing, but you're going to say dark matter. So you've got all these theories, supporting theories, none of which have been proved except by LIGO last month or whatever, who was, I don't know, the whole point of this is that they were so elated and so, proud of themselves because they did it. They discovered gravity waves. Well, wait a minute. For something that's been a known fact for so long, why is that such a big deal? Why did they have to make this announcement? Shouldn't it have been sort of a known thing? It just goes to show that up until last month, we had no evidence for gravity, and what we got was a blip on a chart that the people at LIGO convinced themselves were gravity waves.
The Earth is round does not come from NASA or the government or the Illuminati or whatever you want to claim.
The pictures do. The pictures and this CGI spinning globe that you've got behind you, that probably came from NASA. All of the pictures that you can find that have tattooed your brain with this, where this is where you live. It's tattooed in your brain, no matter what. That's because of NASA. It is a big, huge psyop. Now, of course, the hypotheses of a spherical spinning Earth go way back. But, it's just such a terrible, awful misrepresentation of everything so far. No science involved. It's just all these assumptions that we're all very well aware of that have been debunked. And yet, you sit there and claim that we're the stupid, ignorant ones when you're the one that refuses to look at the truth.
It's been known for a very long time.
No, it's been theorized. But how can you know something that is fallacious, Martymer? Be honest.
Pictures of the Earth from space aren't the deciding piece of evidence. It's just the final nail in the coffin.
That's right. Yeah, it was the final nail in the coffin, but what if those pictures were fake? Now, you said in the beginning it wouldn't matter if those pictures were fake, but if that's all you've got, really, because all of your other arguments are ridiculous, you never proved curvature, you never proved axial rotation, and in the little rocket model that you had there, if that was indeed to scale, that showed what the curvature should be, but we don't see that unless you use a fisheye lens. But it's just I'm really disappointed. I thought I was going to get better out of you being such a hotshot guy.
For the claim that the Earth is flat. But you know what? When it comes to those pictures, you don't even have to trust NASA or any other government agency anymore, because private enterprises have sent rockets into space.
Have they? Private enterprises? Like Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Records, Virgin Space, SpaceX? Yeah, they're faking it too. Space doesn't exist.
Not even that conspiracy claim holds up. Not even that excuse holds up. Next time, we're going to have a look at some specific claims flat earthers make. See you then.
Yeah, well, what about the specific claims that you make?